This program has been approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive credit for this program, please submit your full name, IDCEC number, program class code, and your summary essay to ceu@iida.org. The program class code is located alongside the title of this program on the IIDA Academy page. For a certificate of completion to use toward another certifying body, please submit the same information to ceu@iida.org. Thank you.
Hello and welcome everyone to Collective Design Season 6, Episode 4, How to Design a Bathroom.
Hi, James. Thank you so much. James of the Wonderful Voice, back of the house. Hi, everybody. I'm Cheryl Durst, CEO of IIDA. Delighted to welcome you all to Collective Design Season 6, Episode 4. We've got an intriguing and interesting program for you today, and I'm going to introduce our panelists. We are joined by Stacy Crumbaker, Associate Principal at Malum Architects in Seattle. Stacy also happens to be the current International Board President of IIDA. Hey, Stacy. We're also joined by Sean Aurora, Director of the Candida Building for Innovative Sustainable Design at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Hi, Sean, welcome. You're in Atlanta. And Zach Rudd, Senior Designer, Senior Associate with the DLR Group in Dallas. Zach, welcome to Collective Design. This is such a broad and interesting topic. It has widespread cultural and social and political implications. I want to start with a little bit of level setting, and let's just start with terminology. So toilet room, bathroom, water closet, restroom, lavatory, latrine. There are any number of terms that we use to describe this room, this place that has, that we associate with comfort and privacy and hygiene and so much cultural history. Stacy, can you start us off, and let's talk terminology, and maybe just for the audience's clarity, how we're going to use terms throughout this episode of Collective Design.
Yeah, happy to get us started here, Cheryl. I think a lot about words. Words hold a lot of power, especially in our role as a designer and what we label something on a plan. There is both code implications to how we label things, and what is considered a water closet versus a toilet area, right? So there's a lot of complexities to that, let alone the back decisions that we are making, the public perception of language and terminology. And really, when we use terms like bathroom or restroom, it connotates, in some ways, a residential quality to it, right? The root of bathroom is a room that has a bath in it, right? And that is a space to get ready, a very different in a public realm when you're starting to think about what does it mean to go relieve yourself or step away into a more private space. So we we've really started to see a shift in our practice, primarily in the education space in particular, to language that's closer to what the function of the room is. So it is a toilet room or it is a hand washing area, as opposed to the broader and more generic term of, oh, that's the bathroom, right? So that helps kind of set how do we start to think about that, and how do we release some of our associations that come with language. This too we see in how we begin to refer to gender in the conversation. So it's not the boys' bathroom anymore, right? It's a toilet room or a single occupant room if you're trying to create a space for one versus a space for many. So it's definitely something that is in the process of evolving right now, and then reinforced as well by the symbols that we start to use on those rooms.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually like how you stated relief room, because that space is a source of relief, if not necessarily rest. Also, so interesting. Zach, can you take us down the road of iconography?
Sure. I really liked that aspect of thinking about it from the user perspective, right? We can all imagine ourselves going to that multi-user toilet room, and there's this bald-headed, painted graphic that's probably blue, and you're gonna assume that's the men's restroom and the boys' restroom, right? But then on the other side, there's another icon. This one has a triangle on the bottom half, and if we ask most of our people, right, you're going to say that's a dress. But what if we said that's a cape instead, right? So perspective on what iconography can do. So what if we change that perspective, right, and just get rid of those sorts of icons and really start to infer or allude to what's happening behind the door. So we see a lot of times in hospitality or restaurants that they say eat, sleep. So why don't we just use words or icons that say sit, stand, right? So it's alluding to what could be happening behind the door, and it's not gender specific.
Not gender specific. So let it be a verb.
Mm-hmm.
In
Yeah.
other words. Yeah. Yeah.
Or
That's
just
great.
expose what's behind the door, right? Is there a urinal back here or a toilet? Well, the pictogram can show you that.
So, and in this context of this conversation, we certainly are leaning more into talking about public toilet rooms as opposed to, right, the bathrooms that are in our homes. So just for a little bit of context, we know that toilet rooms and public bathrooms are so much more than the sum of their parts. What about some of the cultural and sociological and economic factors that affect how we think of and use them, but also how they are designed? And I'm going to lean back to you, Stacy, for that, to start that.
Happy to start us here, and by all means, anyone hop
Yeah,
in as we go.
please.
I think what I find very interesting, so I primarily practice in education in PK through 12. Toilets in early education, they teach you how to use a bathroom. Like a school teaches you how to line up. It teaches you what rooms you can go in. It teaches you how to wash your hands, right? And it's actually interesting if you go through an elementary school, the signs that educators put up change from kindergarten to 6th grade, right? When you're first building the skill set of, okay, well, you use the toilet, you go wash your hands, to what does it mean to address bullying in these types of scenarios when the kids are a little bit older. And so I think kind of how we start to frame these conversations, these public toilet rooms are really teaching us how to use space in many ways. And politically, culturally, we have been using them as, I might even say, a little bit of a tug of war, right? If you look back to history, our first legislated gendered bathrooms actually came in Massachusetts in order to provide women the right to a private toilet in the workplace, because in that time, right at the turn of the century, women weren't expected to be out in the public realm. And so there was actually a need to force employers to create that, to give them that basic right. So it's this really interesting way in which this conversation is not new that we sit in now, but is one that has been ongoing for a long time, and how we think about these from a cultural, political perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that super thoughtful response, Stacy. Sean, let me ask you, in your experience, what do people get wrong or misunderstand about the necessity, the availability, and the design of public bathrooms?
So my background is interesting. It's different. My background's law, and so I come at these issues from a public policy perspective. And one of the things I find interesting about the United States is that you're right. The correct terminology is public bathroom, but it's not public space, and that's important. What we have done in the United States is outsourced the provision of bathrooms, restrooms, water closets, toilet rooms that are not in our home. We have outsourced that to the private sector. And so growing up in the 1980s, 90s, crisscrossing the South where I grew up, we never thought about where are we going to go, number one. Number two, you pull up to a gas station, fill up the car, take care of your business. Driving around Atlanta, if I need to go, you just go to a McDonald's, don't buy anything. And now we're seeing that the burden of managing those spaces, some corporations are saying that that's not our responsibility. So that's one thing. You know, the first time I ever saw a paid toilet was when I was in the UK for a high school visit, and we had to pay we joked, you got to pay a pence to go pee. You got to pee to pee, pay a pee to pee. Yeah, exactly. But in hindsight, now I'm thinking, I mean, years later, I thought, well, that's actually brilliant
Pretty smart.
because
Yeah.
the restaurant was providing a service and it was charging a nominal amount for that service. So one of the things I think it's not that they get it wrong, it's they don't appreciate that in many places, the private sector is being asked to provide a public good, right? Again, going back to terminology as a lawyer, terminology does matter. So I think that's one thing that folks don't think about. Another thing I didn't appreciate until I started working on this Generation 2 Reinvented Toilet project that we'll talk about later is the degree to which cultural norms around how you go to like whatever you want to call it, how powerful those cultural norms are. And I think some of these issues that we're having around what to call, who gets to use it, those are cultural norms. And I think we need to be sensitive to not just what's happening in America, but also what's happening in countries where they're trying to introduce technologies that folks have not been used to ever. So those are two things that I think that we don't think about enough when we think about how it is that we go to the bathroom, whatever it is that we decide to call it by the end of this session.
We'll solve it, and then we'll get to one
Yeah.
piece after that.
Yes. Great point, Sean. It is both a question of access and availability. And I
Yeah.
saw popping up in the chat, and any number of design students that I've talked to became familiar with having to pay to use a public toilet when they were doing a semester abroad, and realizing that you had to keep change with you. Certainly that thoughtfulness of being prepared. If any of you have elderly relatives that you've ever traveled with, knowing that there needed to be public toilets nearby, or anybody who had a kidney or bladder condition. And certainly there was a time in our country where people of color, particularly if they were traveling south, had to think about, as they were traveling, the locations of accessible bathrooms. And so just as there was a green book, within that green book would also tell you bathrooms that you had access to at gas stations or restaurants. And so the thoughtfulness that had to occur, and still often has to occur, around public facilities is very much a part of our lives, both past history and recent history. Stacey, let me ask you, what's your assessment of the state of public facilities? What's working well? What isn't working well? And are there certain, I'm going to just front load this question, and are there certain sectors such as schools or workplaces that are doing a better job with this?
Yeah, great question. And I think, builds on some of the conversation, Shane, that you were just starting as well, around like what's our expectation culturally for both access and a level of privacy. I think we have entered a time when culturally in America, at least, there is a desire for an increased level of privacy for whatever reason that is. So what we are often seeing in the education market right now is the rise of more single occupant toilet rooms. Now, they may be grouped together in a multi-user area, but really we're drawing that realm of what is the toilet area to just the toilet compartment, with an increased level of visual privacy and often acoustic privacy, and then following that, right, olfactory, so kind of like how stinky can your smells move from one space to another. And we're really honing that in a smaller space. And there's a couple reasons that's happening in education. One, it kind of reinforces this delinking of the public bathroom, or the delinking of gender from which toilet area you can use, which gives broadens access, right? So again, this idea of who can use it, we're going to increase the number of people that can use this toilet fixture. That then kind of hones in that level of privacy to that smaller space. And it actually makes more public the area that is hand washing, which historically has been a place in education where bullying has happened, right? So it's actually the spot where risk was when you had two gendered bathrooms back to back, because adults couldn't go into that space. Like, it was a negative to perceive, like, the adult, whether it was a security guard or a teacher, coming into the hand washing area because they could see through the gaps, right? So it's this mixture of ages in an inappropriate private space. So when you kind of pull that private line and make it more private but smaller, you can increase the kind of supervision ability of the hand washing area, make that more public in some ways. And I think that gives that the level of safeness that we're looking for in education, and a comfort level between, like, where can adults be and where can kids be at the same time. So I see that's something that's working really well. I'm starting to see it in more and more airports as well. Like, what are these other spaces that are opening it up? And in some ways, I kind of laugh because, 5 years ago, I used to give presentations on this, and all my reference examples were actually bars, because they were already starting the shift to the multi-user single occupant. And I'm like, I'm sorry, this is a bar, but, like, I'm just going to show you how it's working here. It's an interesting way to start the conversation.
Yeah. There have been increased around this idea of a public facility as a place of safety and shelter. You very often see in airports, train stations, bus stations. I know in some public parks in Chicago, there are signs that if you're seeking safety from human trafficking or domestic abuse, I saw a sign not too long ago that says, "You are safe here. Here are numbers that you can call." Even I did see in a bar and a restaurant, if you give a certain signal by knocking a certain way, someone will come to you for help. And so again, thinking about these spots as not just for comfort or hygiene, but literally human safety and comfort.
Yeah.
Zach, let's get some thoughts on assessment of public facilities from you.
Sure, I'd love to tag on that, kind of that safety aspect.
Mhm.
Being in the education realm as well, we've heard students say that it's exactly what you're talking about. There's a lot of bullying occurs in there, and that is their moment of safety. As humans, fight or flight, sometimes bathrooms aren't designed for that flight, right? So something that we've taken away from some of our design experiences is simply a second exit is something that an architectural team, sight lines from staff and teachers, but it's just another way to bolt the other direction if you have that sense of insecurity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
To build on that too, the other
Mhm.
thing we've also seen is an increased level of comfort with cameras actually in the hand. Like when
Mhm.
you pull the privacy line to the toilet fixture, it actually can build more comfort in kind of viewing what's happening in that area as well. So, which I think actually does give people a level of those that are seeking a safe environment, a level of comfort that someone is looking out for me, right?
Mhm.
And maybe holds others accountable to more positive behaviors.
Mhm. Mhm. Stacey, let's kind of keep going down that path. What are some unique challenges when it comes to bathroom designs? And so here's the gender question. Do shifting attitudes about gender expression amplify those challenges?
Yes, and we'll start
Yeah, uh-huh,
there.
uh-huh.
We can start with the gender one because we chat about it a lot, and I'm very um privileged to practice in the Pacific Northwest, and we are very open to both having this conversation, no matter where you land in the answer, but to hold space to have a conversation about it in a way that actually says, well, what does it mean to find a toilet solution that gives everyone choice in a toilet room that aligns with either their gender identity or, right, breaks that connection, and you can actually shift away from gender having to be the defining factor in which toilet area you're using if you have an effective level of privacy. Now, the conversation that often comes up from a more conservative perspective or more traditional and kind of, well, we're used to having a gendered bathroom and I feel safe there. Middle school is a fascinating age for this, right? Because, right, Zach, to your point, there are actually some very positive conversations that also happen in these spaces where people are connecting together. There's a social primping aspect that sometimes happens in middle
Hmm.
school when you're really getting to know who you are and kind of who your tribe is in many ways. And so we do see this conversation coming up, right? And what does it mean to be a 13-year-old individual that is menstruating? And that's a very new experience for them. And so how do you give them the privacy to wash their hands, right? So it introduces this question of like, what's the right level of privacy for each group? And so building strategies to talk about it and kind of find a middle ground. In some ways, when this conversation first started over the last decade, right, we pushed pretty far to one pathway, right? That's like everybody should have a single occupant toilet and everybody should just figure it out. And in some ways, there are pressures that come up, right? Like individuals that have faith or modesty concerns about sharing with another gender, right? So how do you allow for, a young woman to adjust their hijab in privacy outside of the male gaze? And so it really, from a designer's perspective, has to turn us into cultural anthropologists in some way. Like, what are the questions we need to
100%.
ask to this community to help us all understand what we are creating, and will what we are creating support everyone to have a dignified experience using the toilet room, right? And so sometimes that even looks like, well, maybe there's some gendered spaces and maybe there's some non-gendered spaces, and we're pretty intentional to not say gender neutral because even that language can be very polarizing, right? Because I've talked to a lot of students, they're like, no, I do have a gender identity and I identify as a girl, right? Or I
Mhm.
identify as non-binary, right? And there's a choice in that neutral can put pressure on sometimes. And so again, this goes back to language and how to best articulate what does it mean to have an inclusive toilet room, right? Like that's our broadest framing that we've been able to settle on for like a single occupant toilet room, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
can
And
step away
as-
from the political part. Yeah.
Yep. And aside from comfort and safety and relief, I remember talking to a seventh grade teacher about facilities in her school, and she said, we always have to remember it's a social space.
Totally.
Kids
Yeah.
gather, and not just in middle school. If you think about a movie theater, AMC did a study and they learned more about people's perception about a movie that they had seen because people were talking about that movie
Yeah.
in the public facility. So it is a social, as much as we value the privacy, it has that ironic, it's that conundrum of being both a private space and a social space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like you make a lot of friends in line for the toilet room,
you
right?
do.
Like it's
Indeed, you
kind of
do.
ironic, but yeah. So I think that puts a lot of context into it. I mean, the one other thing that I would see, maybe to before we pop to the next question, one thing I see people doing right is regardless of is this a gendered space or a non-gendered space, we've seen a lot more increased access to accessories. Like every toilet compartment has a sanitary napkin disposal, regardless of what gender we're supporting, right? So if you identify as male and you are menstruating, right, like you have that service in the toilet area. That
Mhm.
wasn't the case, I would say, 10 years ago, right? Or so sometimes even access can mean just more thoughtful intention, right? Like baby changing stations, that's another one.
Right.
Used to only
Right.
be in the women's restroom. And
That's right.
so there's been a big movement there as well. So sometimes it's just about providing more
Mhm.
options for people, and then that gives everybody the choice to find a space that is comfortable for them.
Zach, let me let you weigh in on that, around those challenges around bathroom design.
We'll start with just saying ditto. That's great. It started to remind me of, conversations maybe in the last 5 to 10 years about potty parity, right? And how that was really on just that male female, and what you're alluding to with the gender neutral term. Neutral kind of alludes that you're between the two, where we know that
Mhm.
gender is a spectrum. So just like potty parity, where it was more of a male female focus, and that's become more of a spectrum of parity today as well.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. That's great. Thank you for that. And a couple folks popped up in the chat. And Stacey, I'm glad you invoked changing space in all bathrooms. I've heard any number of horror stories of men, grandfathers, uncles, brothers, even who have walked out of a public facility having changed a small child, and then they were being accused, of something that didn't occur, something very nefarious that didn't occur, and when they were simply changing a child, and doing the best they can. They may have been traveling alone with a child, but they didn't have, what they needed in the men's room to do that. So whole other conversation, but worth discussing. Let's Stacey, I'm gonna ask you a question, and then Sean, I'm gonna come back to you. Public bathrooms have to accommodate everybody, right? We all use them. How can designers achieve true inclusion and accessibility, Stacey, in bathroom design? And what are any specific strategies or tactics that they can harness? Can you help us with that?
Yeah. I think, well, strategy one is think about access from multiple perspectives. I think sometimes we hear the word accessibility and we automatically go to how can I best support someone who might be in a mobility device, and people will stop there. And so now, I'm not saying that is not important by any means, because I'm going to give you my number one goal for that
Okay.
next. But how do you kind of support the broad spectrum of accessibility? I saw this really great Instagram reel of someone who was vision impaired, and like on the signs before they stepped into the toilet area, right? There was multiple, it was a multi-compartment area. There was a little map, and they were articulating during the video, they're like, I don't know where the sinks are or where the compartments are. You kind of just walk in and it's the Wild West. And so there was like a little map on the signage to help them orient to how the room was laid out. So there's some tricks like that that are super helpful. From an accessibility perspective, I always give more space to the accessible compartment, and I put a hand washing sink inside of there when I can help it, because oftentimes an individual is alone, but other times they do have a caretaker that is with them, that is
Right.
supporting them, right? And some of
Right.
these, like, you have to remember accessibility guidelines are the minimum base, right?
Mhm.
So they're the worst option allowable by law. So it's like, what do you need to do in some of these areas where you want to give a little extra to provide more support for someone who might need it, and then find that space somewhere else, right? So that's one key. We often always also put the accessible compartment at the end of a row. So if you are in a mobility device, you have to go all the way down. If someone's in it, you have to come all the way back, right? So do you put that one first, right? Like, what are the little things that can actually make these spaces better for people? And we have a lot of power in that.
Mhm.
Because there's not many clients will actually want to spend as much time talking about bathrooms as I feel we do right now, but it's worth a conversation to talk about some of these pieces. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Sean, let me ask you, right? We've already talked about the implications of culture and history and context and politics. Um, where do public bathrooms and sustainability intersect? And how can designers better promote and implement a more sustainable approach to bathrooms?
So the Candida building, for those who do not know, is a living building. And so the Living Building Challenge is a regenerative green building certification standard. And a fully certified living building is net positive energy over the year, net negative waste during construction, net zero carbon during construction, and net positive water, which means it gives back more water to the watershed than it takes. So the Candida building is a 37,000 square foot indoor, another 10,000 square foot outdoor classroom, class lab. And we do not connect to the sewer. So, boom, boom, boom. How do you do that? Our gray water goes to a constructed wetland in the front of the building. And our number one and number two, I don't call it black water. I call it our number one, number two, is composted on site. So we have foam flush toilets. And we have 3,000 people that take a tour of the building each year. Through events like this, we speak to another 10,000 people a year. And I ask everyone uh, three questions. One of those questions is, raise your hand if you think it's a smart idea to poo and pee in drinking water. And no one has ever raised their hand. In fact, most people, it takes them they're like, I don't go to the bathroom and drinking water. Well, most of us do, unless your toilet flushes rainwater or gray water of some sort. You are flushing drinking water down the toilet, and that's where the conversation begins on uh, sustainability in toilets. And the reason I'm doing air quotes for
Yeah, all good.
sustainability is I also ask people whether sustainability is really sustainable. And what I mean by that is a sustainable toilet, a sustainable building, a sustainable product is just a less harmful version of the status quo.
Yeah.
It's not a regenerative building, a regenerative toilet, a regenerative product, which means it's not giving back more than it takes. So what we've done at Georgia Tech with the Candida building is we have foam flush toilets. We use ounces of water instead of gallons of water per flush. And then everything is ultimately composted. All right. But that requires, from a design perspective, the entire building was effectively designed around gravity fed toilets and urinals. So, from a design perspective, it can be limiting. The most recent living buildings that have come online, they have vacuum flush composting systems. which allows for the horizontal and even the, up and then around and down conveyance of your number one and number two. The bowls have water in it, so it could be potable water or recycled gray water or rainwater. So the total water consumption increases, but you gain the flexibility from a design perspective to have your toilets on the same floor as the composting bins. But even then, you do have this system, and again, there's a limitation on the mass deployment of the system. You're solving for that core issue of flushing drinking water down the toilet, and you're also thinking of how a toilet can give back more than it takes by producing compost at the end of the process and not black water. But what we've done at Georgia Tech, working with a team from around the world through a Gates Foundation grant, is we've reinvented the toilet. And what we did was, what we've done to toilets is what we've done to telephones. Just cut the wire, right? When we cut the wire of a telephone, we got telephones into the hands of billions of people. And think about all the copper and other resources that would have been required to lay down landlines. Some of the folks here have no idea perhaps what a landline is, but back in the day, we picked up the phone and there was a line, and then your voice traveled through a line. Similarly, if we cut the pipes of a toilet and created a movable, self-contained appliance, then we can allow for the mass deployment of these appliances. And the way you do that is the machine takes human deposited liquid and feces, which is mostly liquid, and through reverse osmosis creates water for flushing. Solids are either in wipe cultures where we have toilet paper. The solids are turned into cakes, cookies, they're dry, they're pathogen free. And you can also, and this is where, as a lawyer, I say magic, but it's supercritical water oxidization. Magic, it turns into that solid will turn into carbon dioxide and ash. Here's the point. We got to stop flushing drinking water down the toilet.
Yeah.
We have to stop burdening our sewage infrastructure. We need to reinvent the toilet. We just do. All the conversations we're having right now still apply, but from a sustainability perspective, we have to first stop flushing drinking water down the toilet, and second, let's think about the toilet and the urinal as a regenerative tool, a tool that gives us something that's value additive at the end of the process.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Sean. And thank you for that distinction between what is sustainable and what is regenerative. Definitely appreciate that. You led us right into, since you waved two phones at us, you led us right into talking about the implications of technology, right? And we hear about smart this and smart that, and the Wall Street Journal recently did an article about smart bathrooms that leverage all kinds of technology. How are you all seeing, or how might advanced tech be harnessed to make public bathrooms more abundant and cleaner? And we know that technology could come with some enhanced costs. But let's talk about technology and bathrooms and public facilities. Open. Sean, do you want to kick us off there?
Oh, absolutely.
I thought you might.
So I've been to public restrooms in some places in the US, and I've been to pit latrine group pit latrines in other countries, and both of them have their challenges. I'm really now thinking about the half of the planet that doesn't have access to safe sanitation, and how do you use technology to get them safe sanitation? And I really do think it's something like the Georgia Tech team is working on. There are other teams working on this challenge through not just the Gates Foundation, but many organizations, philanthropists have identified the lack of sewage sanitation as one of the top public health and safety issues. And even in places where we've got really robust systems, it takes a lot of electricity to make potable water. And when you're flushing drinking water down the toilet, you're flushing electricity down the toilet. And if that electricity was generated by burning fossil fuels, you're contributing to global climate change every time you flush the toilet. So for me, it's not a smart toilet. It's not an IT enabled or web connected toilet. But it is a technology solution. And that solution is how do you make a pathogen free output that doesn't end up contaminating the water or the food close to where people are going to the restroom, the bathroom, the lavatory, the loo, or whatever. That's really what we're talking about. How do you get rid of it? And pit latrines have failed for a variety of reasons. And one of those reasons is someone's got to go in there and clean it out. And once you clean it out, where do you put it? One of the things I'll say,
Gotta go somewhere.
yeah, it's got to go somewhere. One of the things I say, I ask folks who come through the building, have you ever walked in nature? Yes. Or are you constantly stepping in deer poop or bear poop or possum poop? And folks look at me funny. I'm like, do you just walk into a giant mound of deer poop? No. That's because in nature, all the animals are doing their business all over the place, not in one place. And so one animal's poo is another animal's food. But human beings and our chattel, like, our chickens and cows and pigs, and we go to the restroom, bathroom, whatever word we want to use. We do our business in the same location. When we flush the toilet, it goes to the same location. So we have a concentration problem. And technology can help us solve that concentration problem.
Yeah, thank you for that. Stacy or Zach?
Zach, do you want to start us
Tech-
off on this one?
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is interesting about bathrooms technology is how things evolve in like 10 years. So I think the Wall Street Journal mentioned the Uber app experience, right? And so 10 years ago, we're telling ourselves, don't get into cars with strangers. Now I'm looking to get into a car with a stranger, on weekends. So I'm not a big tech guy, but I'm curious, what the next 10 years will bring for an app, or how we can better provide access and cleanliness to public toilets.
You're
Zach,
right,
people
Zach.
in Atlanta are getting into cars without drivers.
Oh yeah,
That's right.
the rudderless.
Yeah.
It's like the loo finder. I mean,
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
think we see, maybe separate from the larger systems, right? Like I have seen technology pushing into toilet areas, right? Some successfully, some not, right? The water lit, right? Like the operationless faucets, right? The mechanized paper towel dispensers, right? Like all of these different things, which if you talk to a school district in particular, they want as few tech pieces as possible because they are points of failure, right? Like how many toilet rooms where have you been in where it's like the paper towel dispenser has changed 4 times and you can see all the different manufacturers that they've tried to use over time and shifted away from, right? So there is a band-aiding sometimes to some of these tech things. I will say one thing that I think is a very positive thing. I think with the rise of more privacy in the toilet area, the light indicators that are attached to the latch, so it's like it's red if it's occupied or green if it's not, are super helpful because it really helps Like if you can't peek down and be like, oh, I see the feet down here, like what's the signal that tells me who's in the room? And from a school perspective, I think we are seeing more like vape detectors, right? Like what are the tech signals that help support positive behaviors? So that's the one area where we do see a lot of tech move in. More so, I don't know that we're quite at the super toilet yet, but I'm on your team, Sean. I'm willing to make a pitch for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stacy, the green not occupied,
Mhm.
red occupied has been that's it feels like it's even super analog, but that also, aside from being a notification, a number of public municipalities, bus stations and train stations
Mhm.
have found that that's increased safety. People, when you're looking for a space, you are not thinking about your suitcase, you're not thinking about your bags that you're holding. They have found that those public facilities that don't have that notification, there are higher instances of people being robbed.
Yeah.
Because you're busy focusing on, as you said, the feet beneath. So they're seeing things like safety increase
Yeah.
when you're simply letting people know that this space is available.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe don't even get me started on the amount of time I spend talking about what the lock indicator looks like, right? Because I think how big is that green piece so that you can see it quickly?
Quickly.
The biggest conversation I'm seeing now too is in the rise of more private compartments. So whether it's a taller door, I mean, step aside from it's a fully enclosed framed room and it's just an increased privacy partition. The doors are installed with a continuous hinge. In a lower door compartment, there's a special like pop-off hinge that actually allows someone who needs to get access to it. Like if a child's in distress in there, you can pop the hinge off and open the door from outside. Can't do that with a continuous hinge door. And so now we're seeing a lot of like little almost like thumb screws that so kids have figured out, well, I can stick a quarter in this and open it. None of you kids try that. But there are some that actually have a hex key to it. So then now I'm seeing people be like, specify the one with the hex key because my maintenance team will always have that. But I don't want this 13-year-old opening the door on their friend because the minute they've figured out they can, it's not their fault. Their brains aren't fully developed yet. But yeah, it's very interesting. Like what we're specifying becomes very important in some of these spaces. Yeah.
Great note from, I think it was Jason in the audience, in talking about color indicators, being mindful of color blindness. Red, green color blindness doesn't help, or you're not helped when those signs are red and green, which ties right into your commentary, Stacy, about size and level of visibility as well. Let me grab a couple questions from the audience before I go to our final wrap question. Cost and square footage, this popped up. How do cost and square footage factor into the decision to use standard restroom planning versus individual toilet compartments in communal wash areas?
There's a gradient to this one. I'll start there because I do think there is to create an inclusive toilet area effectively. I do believe it comes with an increased amount of square footage often because you're actually trying to provide more space. And to Zach's point, the one way in, one way out, like a two-way access, often means that the planning block needs to go in a different spot in the building. Like it wants to be on the corner of a hallway intersection as opposed to a deep bay space that has been our very traditional planning model. So I won't lie and say that there aren't increased costs to it. There are ways to mitigate it, right? Like whether you're going all the way to a full, like, do you need full acoustic privacy? Do you need a fully framed wall that might have tile on the inside and a hollow metal door? Or is an increased privacy partition enough? Like what level of comfort is there? So we have found a bit of a gradation in those costs. It does come with every compartment needs a sprinkler now, right? Instead of one sprinkler being able to serve multiple compartments. So there is some increased infrastructure costs that align with that, ways to mitigate them and choices in other areas, but it does come at an increased cost, at least in my experience, although I have seen some firms say they can make it pencil out flat. So I don't know if you've been able to get it, Zach.
I'd say it's the same experience as well. Maybe one way that I'm we might be able to find a savings is, if we reduce the number of different types, going from a wall mounted to a floor mounted, really leaning into a good, better, best and having that conversation of priorities with the client and the users.
I'm going to just talk about cost real quick from a
Yeah.
different perspective, which is let's think about what the cost is and who pays the cost for miles and miles and kilometers of pipes to take potable water to a new development for flushing down the toilet and sewage pipes to take the sewage water away from a development. Now imagine all of those costs are gone. Sort of that societal cost, the socialized cost of infrastructure is gone. And now you have a new development with a distributed toilet system where the liquid again is recycled and reused, rainwater, gray water, or biologic water. And the quote unquote waste is not even considered to be waste. It's turned into something beneficial. So let's also think about cost at the macro scale and understand that what we have right now is socialized infrastructure costs. And then we're only really thinking about what's the cost of the project. But in
Mhm.
places where the infrastructure doesn't exist, it gives us a new paradigm.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question from Kiara in the audience, and it's a space that we are all those of us who travel for leisure or business. We're all acquainted with airports, airplane restrooms, right? It's for most people, it's their first example, best example of a for all restroom. And Kiara is asking, is there any history on airplane restrooms? Do they have different code requirements? Does anybody know from an aviation standpoint?
Should call my friends at Teague. I imagine they have a different code require, or like a governing body that says what
Bodies.
is acceptable, right?
Mhm.
I mean, and this is an evolution we are seeing actively in the code right now. I mean, I saw some notes about, right, the difference in what is allowable in my authorities having jurisdiction in Seattle is likely very different than what is happening in Florida or even Texas. I know where you're at, Zach. And there's been a lot of advocacy around, well, how do we need to either um, uh, ask for permission on this project, right? Get a variance that allows us to do this, or in our state, a lot of advocacy to actually change the code to find ways where it is allowable to have an all gender, right, solution that makes it truly inclusive, right? We've done some schools with no urinals, right, which I realize doesn't help our sustainability question at all. And that's a whole nother conversation of like, well, everybody can use a toilet, but can everybody use a toilet to the same level of proficiency, if we're talking about our middle schoolers again, right? So there's a lot of uh, movement in the code, I would say, right now, active change that's happening as it's kind of again in this tug of war that is like, how's the cultural
Yes.
political then aligning with what our rules say we can or cannot do? So there's tension there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we've got just a bit of time left, but Elizabeth has posed a question that I think we all we have on our minds, asking about accessibility of public facilities for the unhoused population. Right? It's an issue in almost every city. Panelists?
I think we're seeing it play out with coffee shops and restaurants, uh, fast food and fast casual restaurants saying this cannot be our responsibility anymore, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think it's in some cities there are public restrooms, meaning restrooms that are if not owned and operated by cities, owned but operated by companies like JCDecaux that use the advertisement. It's something that we got to. I don't know the solution, but it's got to be addressed because in the absence of going number one and number two in a water closet or toilet room, you're going to go outdoors. And that's a public health challenge for the unhoused and for everyone.
Yeah, and not just a public health challenge, it's a dignity challenge.
Yeah, it's a
You know,
dignity.
that is that
It's a dignity.
reduction of humanity. Yeah.
Right, it's a dignity. Is inclusion truly?
Yeah.
We've got
Right to a toilet.
Yeah.
Like who should provide that service? I mean, that is the root of that question, right? Because
Right.
and I agree with you, we are seeing far more public or privatized institutions saying you can't use this unless you buy something, right? So cost becomes a barrier to access because they don't want, you know, those, I'm putting in quotes, those people to be in their facility, right? Like they've decided it's impacting their customer experience to have the othering of individuals that are houseless to use that. We recently put in a bank of public toilets on our waterfront project as part of a parks initiative or as part of a parks project. So like in Seattle, we at least see the burden of public toilets getting pulled in through our parks. Now, the trick is there's not that many parks that are in the middle of a downtown, right? So it's kind of like how frequent is the access becomes the question there. And then like, is there time associated with them that can and cannot be used? Because that's the other factor. It's like, well, they're there, but they're locked because we assume bad things are going to happen in them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Our time panel has we've run out of it, and I think we could easily do a part 2 of this conversation. Let me just ask for a bit of indulgence from the audience. If you all wouldn't mind sitting tight, I'd like to ask one more question of our phenomenal panelists. And, you know, what's next? Are you seeing anything in the world that makes you feel optimistic about the future of public bathrooms, restrooms, facilities? And briefly, is there a preferred future for the design of public facilities? Let me start with you, Stacy.
Yes, I mean, I think my preferred future is an inclusive future that supports the use of toilets as a basic right that gives dignity to everybody that is using it. Bonus points, Sean, if it is better for the planet. I am 100% on board with that. That would be my dreamiest of, that's my question to students. I'm always like, what's your dreamiest of dreams toilet scenario, right? Like that would be mine.
Yeah.
I think most people, the vast majority of people agree with words like dignity, safety, and inclusivity. I really do believe that. It's triggering words. So that trip us up. I see hope in the increasing scarcity of drinking water. It's going to force the issue of how much of it do we flush down the toilet. It's not, oh, great, we're running out of drinking water, we're going to have to come to a solution. We are. It's going to happen. It's going to happen soon. And we have solutions. So that's the good news.
I think it's need forces systems change.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And Zach.
Sure. I think that my hope is that we get through kind of this political disturbance and distraction, and really us as designers, anyone on the call, can use their influence and agency to really bring their perspectives to maybe tables that they aren't at, or have some influence for others that may never have that place at the table. So kind of back to that dignity and advocacy point.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a perfect wrap, Zach. Thank you, Stacy, Sean, and Zach, and to the audience for this compelling conversation that I think demands a part two. I'm just putting in my personal plug for that. Thank you to our sponsor, Excel, for generously hosting this program. And everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay well, stay optimistic. And we'll see you on behalf of IIDA. We'll see you soon. Cheers, everybody. Take care.